All right, let's see how 16th notes work in this system. So we use one E and for our counting 16ths. If your band director uses something else, that's okay, but I'm going to use what we use in class at my school. So to start, I'm going to start with count 1, and then my next 16th note is E. My next 16th note is my and, just like my 8th note used to be. Now, and my last 16th note is da. Continuing on to count 2, 2, E, and da. So right away, and again, we're kind of operating under the assumption that you understand how the rhythm tree works. We can see that we can fit 2 of these 16th notes inside of one 8th note, because if I were just to count 8th notes, I'd get 1 and 2 and. But I've got the E and the does in between those. So 1 E fits in the first half of the beat and fits in the second half of the beat. We'll finish the measure with 3 and then finish with 4 and. Now if you remember, I want to go ahead and put my little and here because I've been doing that, right? My subdivision I've been including. So let's go ahead and do the foot patterns for the stuff we know. That's what we encourage our kids to do. Whenever there's something new, we challenge them to try and figure it out on their own before we explain it to them, but to go ahead and definitely do the stuff they know how to do. So we'll do that first. We know the foot pattern for the quarter note is just down, up, 3 and. We know the foot pattern for count 4, down, space, up, for 4 and, our 2 8th notes. Now 16th notes are going to work a little bit differently for our foot pattern because every time we have a number we go down, every time we have an and we go up. But now I've got 2 notes before I get to my and. So I'm going to actually split my down in half. On 1, I'm going to go part way down. On E, I'm going to go the rest of the way down. And there are 2 parts there because there are 2 notes here. And da are going to work the same way but going up. And is part way up. Da is part way up, is the rest of the way up. So when you're tapping your foot, down, up, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, down, up, down, up. Again, it's going to help you keep track of your subdivisions and your foot if you understand how this foot pattern works. This shows you where your foot's going to be in each part of this pattern. Count 2 is going to work the same way. Part way down for 2, the rest of the way for E, halfway up for and, halfway up for da. Now, I don't need to change anything with the foot patterns for counts 3 and 4 because they're already there all the way. Because even though, well, let's talk about the counts first. So my subdivisions, now the 16th note is the smallest rhythm, the smallest count in the measure. So I'm going to subdivide all the way down to the 16th note. The reason I do this is to help me keep track of the pulse, keep track of what the tempo is. So between 3 and little and, I'm going to have little E and little da. Because again, all 3 of these subdivisions exist in this quarter note. And if I'm thinking them all the time, or if I'm counting them out loud while I'm clapping, I'm going to be much more accurate when I get to count 4. 3E and a 4. 3E and a 4 rather than 3, 4. I don't know where 4 happens. If I'm keeping track of this 16th note, I'm much more accurate. I can fit 2 16th notes in an 8th note. So I've got 4 as my first of these 16th notes. My second one's going to be E, little e, and then little da to finish that out. Now our foot pattern doesn't change because none of these are new notes. The small syllables are not new notes, so everything's connected, just like it was way back with half notes and whole notes. Now if we move down to some 16th note combinations, we see a bunch of different rhythm patterns here. We're going to again start with what we know. We're going to start with count 4 because this is just the same as this, except it starts on count 4 instead of count 1. Big 4, big E, big and, big da. Foot pattern, down, space, up, space, up, because there are 4 distinct notes. All right, now let's take this back and let's go all the way to measure, or the count 1 here. So we know we're going to start on 1. Draw my 1. That's my first 16th note. Right away, I have another 16th note. My first 2 notes are 16th notes, so I'm actually going to start it the exact same way I started these 2 16th notes, with an E. I'm done with that particular note. Now I'm going to move on. What's my next count? It's and. So I go big and. Now this is an 8th note, though. So how many 16th notes fit inside of an 8th note? 2. So I'm going to have my and I'm going to have da. Except it's going to be little da, just like it was over here on count 4, because and da both fit in this 8th note. Now my foot pattern here is going to be sort of a hybrid too. 1 and E is going to be down, space, down, because they're both starting on the first half of the beat and they're separate notes. And da is just like it is for an 8th note, so it's all the way up, because this takes your foot all the way there. Takes the entire up. Count 2, I'm just flipping this rhythm around. So now my 8th note comes first. I'm going to start with big 2, but that's only the first part. Remember, I have 2 16th notes I have to find here. So my next syllable, my next 16th note here would be E. Because it's in this 8th note, it's going to be a little E. Now I'm done with the 8th note. I move on to the next note, a 16th note, just and. And then my final 16th note is da. And then again, 2E, our foot pattern, is going to be all the way down, just like a normal 8th note would be. And da are both 16th notes, so I'm going to have my halfway up, space, up. Now, for 16th, 8th, 16th, this is a rhythm that tricks up a lot of newbie rhythm learners. I remember it gave me fits for a long time. I think I was in high school before I figured out how to do this properly, maybe even later than that. So I'm going to start with count 3. And that's only a 16th note, so I'm done with 3. I'm not going to add any small things. My next note after that is going to be an E, because that's my next syllable I would use. It's a new note, so it's going to be a big E. But I'm not done with this note yet, because it's an 8th note. I can fit 2 16th notes in here. E, my next 16th syllable, is going to be and. Now I'm done with my 8th note because I've got both parts. I move on to a 16th, my final 16th note, which again is going to be da, and it's big da because it's a new note. Foot pattern here. 3 is going to be the halfway down because we're not through E yet. E and is going to be halfway down and halfway up, but they're going to be connected because this is all one note. Down, up, but I don't go all the way up because I need da to go the rest of the way up. Now, moving on to dotted 8th note and 16th note patterns. Just like with our dotted quarter notes, we know that a dot adds half of a note to itself. So half of an 8th note is a 16th note. So what I've got here is essentially just 3 16th notes. So what that means is I need to have 3 16th notes worth of syllables under each of my dotted quarter notes, dotted 8th notes rather. So if I take my first 3 16th notes and I plug them in here, 2, E, and, that takes care of the first 3. And then my 4th one is just left over for da. On count 4, we flipped it around. We start with just a 16th note. So that's my first of my set of 4. And then I need the other 3 on my dotted 8th note, E and for my last 3. Our foot patterns, for our dotted 8th notes, it's going to be the down, down, up. It's these first 3, again, combined all in one line because that's one note, and then a space for da, for our last syllable. Count 4 is the opposite. Count 4 itself is just a 16th note, so it only goes halfway down. The dotted 8th note, E and da, is the rest of the way down, and then all the way up, all connected in sort of a check mark.